In the third chapter of the book of Esther from the Bible, the Old Testament, Haman, an official in the Persian court, gains authority and becomes offended when Mordecai, a Jew, refuses to bow to him. Haman devises a plan to annihilate all Jews as a result in the Persian Empire, casting lots to determine the date for their destruction. This sets the stage for the imminent danger facing Esther's people. The Book of Esther in general revolves around Queen Esther's courageous efforts to save the Jewish people from Haman's plot. It highlights the themes of faith, courage, and divine intervention as well. As the narrative unfolds, Esther risks her life by approaching King Xerxes to plead for her people, setting the stage for the critical events that follow in the fourth chapter. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, as we resume to read this from the fourth chapter of Esther, he tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out to the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of that king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, with weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Within context, that is how the people express their repentance for all their perceived iniquities that they feel may have been the reason why they may have even been potentially deserving of such a thing, either from any human source or from God, or the matrix system itself, so to speak, in the meta or aggregate. Continuing on, when Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she too was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Oh, funny theme. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city, in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy, plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their lives, as a particularized exception. But 30 days have passed since I was called last to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this, as fate would have it, perhaps. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Of course, they understood fasting upregulates your GABA beta receptors, which increases connectivity to God as well as insight, intelligence-wise. Get it? That's what I've been talking about for 7 years. People don't pay attention. Continuing. Do not eat or drink for 3 days straight so we can upregulate our receptors, get more insight, and figure out how to proceed from there because your antenna gets sharpened. Get it? Continuing. They knew this for thousands of years. Very obvious. Proceeding. He says, I and my attendants will fast the same as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. We have a very interesting story that's unfolded in this chapter. You see that someone outside of Esther seems to be falling into some kind of danger, generalized, you could say. It happens to be their lives, in fact, and it's multiple people, it's everybody. But the point is, somebody outside of Esther, who Esther has a fiduciary duty to, in terms of the link of loyalty or whatever, that's there naturally, because those are her people, her group, family and extended family, and your ethnicity, your nation, your brothers and sisters. You understand? Anything that constitutes even an offense to them at the basic level, that would be an insult to their dignity. This is the most rudimentary basic. There is such a thing in this life as one fulfilling their duty by disregarding their own well-being, their own privileges, their own status with the person who they're asking for something particular and special. They're asking for a grace where maybe you might be given, or maybe you might ruin the relationship, the friendship, the status, or ruin that person's life too. But it doesn't matter. That's what in the East, the ancient Chinese called this the moral law, which means that if you know that what you're doing is fundamentally right, this overcomes the man's aversion, fear-based aversion, such that people easily go to the army, run into death, and get themselves killed because it's part of the God code. The program in your brain is running correctly when you're going, and you're aligning with your duty, what you should be doing. Exactly like I quoted Nelson Mandela in one of these recent videos. Exactly, he said the same thing. It's all about the duty you have and nothing else, obviously. But even the woman here knew that. Of course, women know loyalty, men know duty too. So it's a fundamental fabric of the whole human race. Do we see, then, any parallels between that situation, in a very generalized, simplistic sense, of course, very generalized, but nevertheless in parallels, between Esther looking to serve as an intercessor on this, on behalf of her people, and me, myself, turning to Anthony, who is willing to show, I won't even acknowledge your mother, I won't even treat her with respect, I won't even reply to her, and I, her son, even though I actually have a cause to be mad at her, even I am looking and I say, that's not fit. I have to step in and ask and petition for something different. It matters because that's the dignity of my mother and my family overall, including, which would extend to me. It naturally affects my dignity too. It'd be an offense to me. Killing the Jews is an offense to Esther. She's one of them. Offending my mother is an offense to me. She's also one of me. Is my relative, my mother. Understand? Of course. The particularities of this position work out even worse for Anthony. Anthony's not the king here. He's actually supposed to be, in essence, serving the person whose interest he's representing by advocacy, in essence, here. So he's, even in this situation, more bound to consider holding to what? His fiduciary duty, of course. Naturally makes sense. We proceed onwards to the 5th chapter, as it here emerges now. Regarding Esther's request to the king. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, right in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall at that time, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her. Oh, but I thought the punishment was death, huh? Oh, he was pleased with her and held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it would be given you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today for a banquet I have prepared for him." Bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asks. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." This is true graciousness. That is the mark of a true man. That is a king. Do we understand what it is that I'm trying to point out here? Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet. I will prepare for them then, and then I will answer the king's question." My God, so many interesting parallels. I invite, it's funny, it's occurring to me now. Look in my own situation. I invite Anthony to come out to eat, to sit down. I have funds prepared. The whole meal's on me. I want to treat him why? Because that is my friend, and I regard him. Meanwhile, we talk about the things that matter, but I'm on hand there to entreat him. You understand? Why? Because graciousness for graciousness. Because I'm treating Anthony until the very last moment where it's no longer possible to deny that he's anything or rather the one would have to deny any conclusion other than the fact that he's something else other than a king. A true friend will honor you as a king. How? He treats you the way Esther treats the king here, by assuming you have the kingly qualities. I'll come up to you even though it's supposed to be death, but I know that you are of grace, and I am too. And that's when we sit down as diplomats and discuss beautifully. This is civilization. This is society. This is life. Not the drudgery and mindlessness zombieville we have outside today. What is this crap? We're starting to see some of the interesting parallels, but also some of the sad aspects of divergences between this situation and the situation I was in. Was I treated like an Esther? Nevertheless, the situation was properly mine. As I mentioned, the fiduciary duty that naturally occurred in the situation was reversed. In fact, I had the genuine moral overarching right to be considered in a matter more high by what was properly owed than in this case here in this story. Nevertheless, we proceed. Haman's rage against Mordecai. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him and how he had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Proceeding onwards, it is slightly interesting. It's relatively short, probably halfway through already, at least, maybe a little more, something like this. We'll finish the story. I've never read this directly, verbatim, word for word like this, so let's discover it. Mordecai honored. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. King's instinct is to always preserve and administer justice, fairness. Mind you, it's not the king here specifically, as we see, who ordered by his own authority, the destruction of the Jews, but that Mordecai character. We continue. You get with character. These are literally real historical people, very fascinatingly and interestingly, which is also mind-blowing. We continue. The king said, "Who's in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. Or there might have been that Haman. Oh, yeah, I'm not even paying attention. My head's spinning tonight. Oh, yeah. We continue. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" That's nice, right? Ask the person himself. Now Haman thought to himself, "Who's there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" Go at once, the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew." Oh, it's for Mordecai, of course, "who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect." I have like amnesia. Sometimes I have good memory in certain ways, and then something with my short-term memory, I can't even remember what's going on sometimes. It's fascinating. Wonder what brain damage does to people, right? Huh. Well, we continue. "Do not neglect anything you have recommended." Continuing. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Afterwards Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. And then we find perhaps what happens next here as we proceed to read that. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, that's how to party, guys. The king again asked Queen Esther, "What is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request now? We've been waiting for days, right? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet for that, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen, or bother the queen while she is with me in the house about this?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house." That's how you take care of a problem. Quick, like this, it's done. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. See that? Then the king's fury subsided. Fury. Consider it. A natural reaction to indignation, to offense. A natural byproduct. What do we do in this life? We look out for each other, those of us who matter. When something offends someone who we care about, we naturally become angry for them. Why would one in my position turn to any one of his friends in order to inform them that anyone else in my life is guilty of anything? And yet, when even that guilty person is my own family, when I then go to that same person and say, well, listen, I'm petitioning on behalf of the dignity and honor of my own mother, that you treat her with a little bit more courtesy. And Anthony refuses me and says, no, my idea is better. I won't consider you. The general moral principle reflected in this story, just read from the book of Esther from the Old Testament, is clear. So too from the other pillar of the Judeo-Christian biblical tradition, from the New Testament, that's the Christ era, you have from the book of Matthew, essentially once again, the same principle brought back regarding grace and giving. What perhaps would almost obviously, in a true moral perspective, be owed from someone in Anthony's position within the circumstance? We find out from the book, from the chapter, from the 5th chapter of Matthew. You've heard that it was said, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist even an evil person. If someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if someone forces you to go 1 mile, compels you in essence, go with them freely 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. That is, wherever possible in this life, in all circumstances, aside from those in which it is absolutely and utterly contextually unreasonable to do so, going against the farthest capability of your own dignity, one's own dignity, you owe it to every single next man in front of you who's reached out to you, who's asked you for anything. Give to them even more and freely. This is grace for grace. This is the moral principle and policy of the golden scepter. Do you understand? This is what I expect on this earth when I turn to my left and to my right. I entreat you as brothers until the day you cross me. And then even then, I hold it to be so. Tell me if I'm wrong, anybody, everybody. I give you a fair chance to work it out. But they have to refuse me. But once you refuse me, no good. That's when the karmic problems start pouring on their heads after that.